All right. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to just give it a few minutes as we start off here so that people can join. Just a heads up, our main guest, Senator Nancy Skinner, is going to be a few minutes late, but she said she'd be joining us in about 10 minutes. But I want to introduce my co-hosts and our guest this evening. First, my co-host, we have Whitney Leigh here. Whitney is a past public defender for Santa Clara and San Francisco. And also he's currently now the vice chair of California Progressive Alliance. I didn't introduce myself, Nick Cortez. I'm the chair of California Progressive Alliance. And we also have a guest speaker here as well, Sonja. Sonja's with Roots and Rebounds. And Sonja, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about what is Roots and Rebounds and what do you all do there?
Absolutely. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep, I got you.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining on a Tuesday evening, and it's wonderful to be connected to this group. It's our first time collaborating and hopefully the first of many. So my name is Sonja Tonneson-Castellano. I'm with a nonprofit organization called Root and Rebound. We are headquartered in Oakland, California, and we're a statewide organization in California and also a sister site in South Carolina. And we also have national programs. And the mission of Root and Rebound is to restore power and resources to families and communities that have been most harmed by mass incarceration. And we do that through legal services, advocacy, policy reform, litigation. So we're mostly a team of attorneys and activists, and really our work is very much rooted in a long history of mass incarceration and racial inequity in this country. And we see that actually built into law and policy and structures. And so as long as it took to build up so many different caste systems really in the United States through the lens of a criminal legal system, we are also working to undo that and really see our work as a restorative and reparative form of legal advocacy that really centers people who have lived experiences with the criminal justice system and the solutions that our communities need for true public safety and healing. And so I'm really excited to be joining tonight because we've also worked really closely with Senator Skinner. She's been a champion for many years, long before my tenure in this work, for criminal justice reform and for low-income communities and communities of color, and creating pathways for opportunity and for justice and healing for people who have been most harmed by mass incarceration. So she is really, for many of us who are doing this work at a grassroots level, a major champion in the legislature and someone who pushes forward legislative reform and policy that brings these values into our structures and systems and into reality. So I'm happy to be joining you all today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and we're so thankful to have you with us. And then I was happy to be introduced to Root and Rebound. And just a few other housekeeping things, that this event is recorded and it will be posted. You can email info@californiaprogressivealliance.com for information, or you can find it on our website and YouTube channel, and also through social media. And there is a Q&A box. You can place your questions in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand. Since we have a smaller audience this evening, we'll do our best to try to let you all speak and give you an opportunity to ask your questions directly to the senator or to any of us as those arise. Whitney, did you want to add anything while we're here?
No, just delighted to have the opportunity to participate. You know, I just learned about Roots and Rebound recently, and you guys are doing wonderful work. And obviously, I'm really happy to have a chance to hear from Senator Skinner. You know, I think, you know, there's so much that's been sort of held up because of the COVID. We've kind of been in sort of stasis, and life is still going on. And so it's an opportunity to speak to someone who's in government is rare. So really looking forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in a regular year, it's hard to follow all the legislation and everything going on. But now with COVID, it seems even crazier. And I'm also looking forward to our discussion. I know that Senator Skinner had introduced some very interesting bills that I wanted to ask her about, but I'm actually not sure where they're at right now because things have changed so quickly, and the legislature is rapidly shifting every week. It seems, who knows what's going to happen. So she will be joining us here, I think, within the next 5 minutes. I'll just take a second, and if you guys aren't familiar with California Progressive Alliance and the work that we do, we are a statewide alliance organization. We're all volunteers. We're organizers and activists. We have a large ally list of alliance groups throughout the state. We work to essentially try to get corporate influence out of our political system. We want to get money out of politics. We want to push for progressive policies, such as Medicare for all. We want a lot what Sonja was talking about with the criminal justice reform. So we're working in a lot of different ways. We have action teams and ways you can get involved. So please, if you're not familiar with us, check us out at CaliforniaProgressiveAlliance.org. Sonja, anything else? So you guys have been around for 7 years, you said? So you're a relatively new organization.
Yes, yeah. In the history of nonprofit life, yes, we are still youngins. We have a team of about 35 people now. Our offices, most of our statewide California team is in Oakland, but we also have work based in Fresno in the Central Valley, in San Bernardino, and in Los Angeles. And then our newest sister site in South Carolina. And a big part of our model is actually having high impact civil rights attorneys who are embedded within community-based social services organizations that are serving formerly incarcerated and systems impacted people and their families. So some of those sites focus on particular target groups, like our work in San Bernardino and Fresno are both really focused and centering on Black women and women of color who have children, who have families who've been impacted by mass incarceration. So we're partnered with groups like Time for Change Foundation, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition in California, and in South Carolina, our deep partner there in the South is Soteria Community Development Corporation that focuses on like social enterprise and mentorship for formerly incarcerated men. And that's also a statewide legal office. So that's a big part of how we approach advocacy, is really through the leadership of people who are directly impacted, through people of color who have been impacted by mass incarceration and most harmed, and seeing lawyers as coming alongside those communities and adding that tool to the wider tool belt of advocacy and organizing. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to policy reform, obviously, for anyone who's ever dipped their toes, including myself with a JD and having practiced for 7 years into policy, legal language is not English. It is another language unto itself. And it's extremely complicated. It doesn't often really speak directly to the community. It's hard to understand. No. And unfortunately, the way we're still set up right now is that lawyers play an important role in influencing legislation, in comprehending it and enforcing it and litigating it and making it into terms that lay people can understand and really know their own rights and be able to enforce their own rights. So that's a big part of our belief system. And hopefully one day we'll be at a place where it's not so complicated and the barriers to access are not all there. But until then, the legal field has been, it's been one of those things that people see as a luxury, that the wealthy, the elite, you picture a corporate CEO having a lawyer on speed dial, but we don't see, communities coming out of prison and jail as having a lawyer on speed dial to support them and advocate alongside them. So that's really our approach to advocacy.
Are you guys familiar with, do you practice the participatory defense model?
Our team has been trained on that. Yes, absolutely. And a lot of times our civil rights attorneys are working alongside public defenders, alongside appointed counsel in family dependency cases where a child is in the child welfare or foster care system. So in these different situations, which are still far and few between, where people actually have an appointed attorney if they're low income, often that system is still not set up for ultimate success and for people to have all the resources and advocacy available. So having an attorney that's actually embedded in the community, that has rapport and trust with clients, who doesn't have a caseload of 500 people, which is really the truth in a lot of our, our defense community that's just completely under-resourced right now. It can be really helpful to have a community lawyer who's working alongside those appointed advocates and who knows that person, who knows their family, and can bring them into the process.
On the litigation side, so are you able to use, I guess, is it 1983 actions? Is that sort of thing that you're bringing? Or, I mean, I like the idea of your ability to use sort of grassroots connections to bring litigation that has a closer connection to the needs of the community you're trying to serve.
Yeah.
What kind of procedural venues are you using? This is 1983. Is that sort of a major area, or is it other? I mean, I'm just thinking how it works.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I see Senator Skinner is joining us now, so I don't want to go into her speaking, but I'll just answer your question quickly, Whitney. But yes, in terms of litigation, so in terms of, the way the law impacts people who've been involved in the justice system and people who have conviction records, there's actually been studied 48,000 legal barriers that lawfully discriminate against people who have a conviction history. So that's, encoded lawful discrimination. And a lot of our advocacy work is trying to undo those layers of discrimination in the law. And as movements have been successful in California, but across the country to restore rights to people who have been systems impacted, we now have more laws to actually stand on to bring all kinds of litigation. So we bring litigation related to discrimination in employment, in fair housing, in parole and probation conditions, in occupational licensure. So there's all different areas of law in which we're increasingly getting more laws and policies, thanks to people like Senator Skinner and her comrades, who are actually building up policies that we can then enforce and litigate that protect the rights of people with records, because for so long, actually their rights have not been respected under law, and we still continue to face those barriers. So that's something we're trying to undo and dismantle. And as we get good laws, as lawyers, we're able to play that value to the community to actually be able to make sure those laws have teeth.
Great.
Thank you, Sonja. All right, well, welcome, Senator Skinner. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Sure.
Do a brief introduction so that you know who all is here. So I'm Nick Cortez. I'm chair of the California Progressive Alliance.
Great.
With me, my co-host is Whitney. He is our vice chair of California Progressive Alliance and also a former public defender for Santa Clara and San Francisco.
Okay.
And then we also have Sonja, who is one of your constituents, and I believe you're familiar with her organization, Root and Rebound.
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah. So thank you again so much for joining us.
Sure.
And yeah, we're happy to have you here this evening and looking forward to a good discussion. And I want to give our audience a little bit of background on you, if I may, and just introducing. So Senator Skinner, you are a longtime criminal justice reform advocate. You've authored 2 landmark California laws, SB 1421, which made police misconduct records available to the public for the first time in 40 years, and SB 1437, which reformed the state's felony murder rule so that people who do not commit murder can't be convicted of that crime. You also authored bills to reduce gun violence and allow people with prior felony convictions to serve on juries. This year, you authored, and we're going to talk about this, I believe it's changed, but it was SB 776, the Coming Clean on Police Records. It greatly expands your work on SB 1421. And then, just so everyone's aware, you represent California Senate District 9, which is on our East Bay, which includes Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond areas. And you are on the Public Safety Committee and the Budget Committee.
Chair.
And I think that about covers it. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Sure.
So I think we just wanted to start off with maybe if there's anything else you wanted to share about sort of your background. I know you've been in politics a long time, and in this particular position, you've only been in for a few years, correct?
Well, I've been in the California legislature since 2014, except for a 2-year break. So I was in the state assembly, and then now I'm in the state senate.
Okay, all right. And yeah, so just maybe talking a little bit about your successes as far as legislation. I know we talked about a couple of them, but is there anything else that you'd like to highlight that is particularly something of interest to you?
Sure. And I think it has a similar theme, though maybe different. First, on the, we're going to talk a lot about police records in a minute, but I think I think my proudest accomplishment was the felony murder rule. And because that one, eventually police records were going to be opened. I mean, I'm very glad that I shepherded and how it quite happened that year, but eventually that was going to happen. And of course, hopefully the bigger picture opening will happen this year. We keep our fingers crossed. More than our fingers crossed, we will do it. But the felony murder, that's a much harder thing to change, because DAs and Whitney, as a former public defender, you know this well. DAs want laws that make it easy for them to convict, because they want to be able to say, hey, I convicted X number of murders. And number one, there aren't that many murderers. First off, it's just not that much murder committed. There's not that many murders. And murder is hard to resolve. And so if you can get 5 people with a murder conviction, then you can stand up as a DA with a great little, scorecard. And that's ridiculous, in my opinion. And so that was a much, much harder bill to change, but we did change it. And now there are, I don't know how many people, maybe Gabe, I think Gabe was maybe going to be on, but maybe Gabe knows now, but I know at least 50 people have been released from prison. And not only do we have people that have been released, no one will ever be charged with, should I say no one? I mean, you can still be charged as an accomplice, but in the kind of circumstance that used to be charged with murder, you can't. So I'm very, 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 very proud of that one.
Could you explain? I think not everyone's going to necessarily understand
what felony murder is.
How it works,
Okay. Good point, Whitney, because I didn't even understand. So first off, I am not a lawyer. I am an environmental scientist. But, I have this passion. California is the poster child for mass incarceration. And interestingly, because of the virus, as terrible as it is, and as horrible as it is that innocent people, and I say innocent because if you were not convicted, if you were not given a death sentence, if you died in prison because of the virus, you were an innocent death. But that said, California's poster child for mass incarceration. And in 1970, we had 24,000 people imprisoned. We went up to 170,000 just, 6-7 years ago. We dropped to about 124,000 before the pandemic started. Today, we are at less than 100,000 people in California state prisons. First time in how long since we've been to first time since the 90s. Wow. So that's incredible. Now, felony murder, sorry. All right, so I didn't know what this damn thing was. I didn't think that I could be sitting in a car with 3 other people and not know that one of the people in the car had a gun, and that if that person used their gun while I was still sitting in the car, that I could be charged with murder and be equally culpable as the person with the gun. So that's what felony murder is. So, 5 of you go to a party together. You don't know that one of the people who might not even be your friend, might just giving you a ride, has a gun. And in the context, they use the gun and a death occurs. Then what felony murder law allowed is that all of you could be charged with felony murder. And it was so absurd that it had situations where the actual shooter, the actual murderer would get off And the people who were not even affiliated would get convicted of murder and serve life sentences. So that's how absurd the law was. But there were laws all through the US on this concept. It's supposedly an old English concept of whatever, but very, very bad, but very good for DAs, because then, of course, they could rack up a lot of convictions. But we eliminated it. So
that's excellent. I mean, that's amazing, because I mean, I can you know, attest firsthand at how cruel and absurd that law was as applied. You know, situations where you know, the police might even shoot the person who's the shooter, and if that person died, you know, the person who assaulted could die, and then someone who was just in the area could be, you know, convicted of murder of the person that went with them to the party. I mean, it was crazy absurd, but that's wonderful work. Amazing. I will say, though, I have to say, I know you're going to get to it, but when you said that you knew that police records were going to be disclosed, I didn't.
okay.
So that's
All right, so I'm one of those people. I'm kind of a, I don't know if it's an optimist, but it was more, I mean, no, you're right. But the police records was really hard.
Yeah.
Just back to felony murder for 1 second. Governor Brown, Jerry Brown was governor at the time we got felony murder and the police records. He wanted both of those bills. He just felt that felony murder was really wrong from a moral point of view. And so he really wanted it. And he would call me and he would tell me, don't weaken it. Do not, you know, take this amendment that, you know, X or Y are asking you. So it was really good. And he actually, when it was on the floor in the assembly, he was calling members and urging them to vote. Now, on the police records, Governor Brown, is unfortunately the reason that California has 40 years of complete secrecy on police records, because back when he was governor the very first time in the late 70s, the police, the practice after the California's Public Records Act passed was police agencies started destroying all their records so they would never have to release them. And so judges and DAs were concerned because they would not have records related to criminal cases, not so much about a criminal case against the cops, but just criminal cases in general. And so they passed the law to make the records not public in order to get the police agencies to retain the records. Wow. And even with that, they only required them to retain them for 5 years. So that was crazy. But anyway, so he regretted that law. And so he was also very helpful on the change SB 1421. He wanted to leave office with that change. That's now, right. Many people before me did not try to fix felony murder, but many people before me tried to fix police records. And the very fact that Gloria Romero, Mark Leno, others had tried, mostly them, really helped set the stage for me to be successful. So I have to honor the fact that when you have something like that, you don't weaken the opposition, but rather you begin to make cracks in the debate, and you begin to create a context for more legislators being able to see the problem with the policy when other people have tried it before you. So that's why I meant that at some point. Now, of course, I was greatly assisted by the fact that the Newspaper Association backed that first bill, SB 1421. And when some police unions started giving huge contributions to a couple of members right before the vote, the newspapers, they quickly called them out in the newspaper.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And anyway, so that was kind of interesting. So having the newspapers be not only so strong, like with op-eds, or rather their editorial page, but also being willing to call individual members out, that was pretty powerful. So
yeah. Here in San Jose, just a few weeks ago, our news group filed a lawsuit against the San Jose Police Department for not releasing the police records.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I think we'll get into this further, but yeah, there continues to be issues even with 1421 with accessing those police records.
Right.
So maybe you want to go into then what you're introducing now to,
Sure.
to strengthen?
So SB 776 is the number. And
It is.
SB 776, so first, thank everyone in California and across the country who turned out in protest of the murder of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Now, George Floyd should not have died. But if his death allows us, not only us, but across the country, to get many of these reforms in, Connecticut just passed an incredible omnibus reform law. But 1421 was very inadequate. It only allowed for 3 types of records, and it didn't really change the number of years that they retained them. It didn't put any real penalty on an agency that did not release records. It's a good bill, but it needed to go further. So SB 776 way opens the category of records that would be released so that we can find out about those officers who engage in racist and biased actions. So we can see officers who engage in any and all uses of force, because deadly force has got a very narrow definition. Also, it allows us to get records on officers who have a history of wrongful arrests and wrongful searches, which tells us a lot about an officer. So it really opens the door to many, many more records. And then it puts fines on those agencies that do not release records. And in the case of, for example, either a citizen or a newspaper agency that has to sue to get records, it puts in civil penalties so that if you win the lawsuit against the agency, they'll have to pay the penalties. So it does all those things. And then the last thing it does, which is very important. So one of the things that some officers and some agencies do, so I'm an officer, I was engaged in some misconduct, I'm being disciplined, or I know that I will be disciplined, and I know that an investigation is about to open, I go to my chief and I say, okay, I'll leave, I'll walk away. And then, so then there's no paper trail, there's no record. So then I walk away, and the next agency goes to hire me, they don't know anything about whatever it is that I did. So the other thing that SB 776 does is requires the agency to create the record, regardless of whether the officer leaves. And then it requires every agency, when they hire someone who has been employed in another law enforcement agency, that they must review that officer's records before hiring. So that then you can't have any city or county say, oh, I didn't know that about him. I didn't know that Derek Chauvin had this history of use of force. I didn't know that Derek Chauvin had all these complaints against him. That will eliminate. So that's the purpose of SB 776. That's what it does.
Wow. Yeah, that's wonderful. Does it include like a time frame limit for police departments to
It also lifts the 5 years. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
Right now they only have to hold records for 5 years. It lifts that.
Okay, awesome. Wow, that sounds amazing. And where is that bill right now? Because it's really challenging to follow where things are going this year with COVID and all. So it's still an active bill.
Well, I just put the language in about maybe 2-3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So it will be heard Assembly Public Safety, I think tomorrow. Let me see. I think I go up there tomorrow and present this bill.
Are there things, let's see, we have, yes, tomorrow that I think.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Are there any measures, there are any things that members of the public can do to assist or to support what you're doing right now with that?
No, I appreciate that. There's a couple of other really good bills. So there's a number of members of the Black Caucus who have some really excellent bills on different aspects. Mine's on police records. Senator Bradford has one that would decertify officers that have conviction records. That's a very important bill. I think that I could provide Nick with a list of some of the really good bills. And then I would encourage people to send to email their legislators saying they strongly support the bill. Use your social media, tweet about it, Instagram, whatever, you know, you like to use.
TikTok.
You know, in New York State, the artists and musicians, Rihanna, so many of them, Aloe Black, they got behind the repeal of New York's law. It was 50A that had secrecy on all police records, and lots of artists and musicians got behind that and really stemmed the tide, and that was repealed. So I think if we do similar, if we get just create that kind of create the kind of momentum that the protests on George Floyd's murder created, we'll get these good bills through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then kind of moving on from here, given that we're in this pandemic, and we've kind of touched on it, but the issues around COVID getting into our prison system now. And we've talked about how, you know, we have been able to reduce the prison population to under 100,000, but still, that's a large prison population.
Yes.
And it's still, you know, in my opinion, way too much. And so I know in one of your recent newsletters, you'd mentioned the Senate Committee on Public Safety on July 1st said that there was roughly 5,000 incarcerated individuals that had tested positive in our prisons and 24 that had died. I know that number has increased significantly since then. I don't know, what are your thoughts on incarceration, especially now during COVID? I mean, do you have any other thoughts on that? What we can do on that front?
Well, you're completely right. We have way too many people incarcerated. We have 4 times what there was in 1970, and we're not 4 times the population. And there's no correlation. Every bit of data research shows there's no correlation between the number of people you incarcerate and what public safety, what kind of safety there is in community or crime rates. Mm-hmm. And if anything, incarceration probably contributes to crime. But more seriously, incarceration it decimates entire families for generations. It decimates neighborhoods. It decimates entire communities. And I can't say the absolute worst, because clearly, over policing and police violence is beyond the pale, but the over incarceration has even more impact generationally mm-hmm. on Black Americans than even the police violence. So I don't mean to minimize the police violence whatsoever, but I guess, and I'm glad you raised it, I want to make sure that everyone who's focused on police reform is also focused on decarceration, mm-hmm. because they are hand in hand. And in a kind of weird way, I'll say in defense of the police are really, what is their job? Their job is to enforce the laws that a racist culture has put into place. And not only the laws, now you think about it, you could say maybe, obviously some of the drug laws and some other things were very racist laws, is not even so much that the laws in and of themselves are racist, it is their how we enforce them. Yeah. So who's stopped? I'm not stopped. So who's stopped? Who's arrested? Who's prosecuted? And then who actually gets incarcerated? Absolutely. If you are Black or brown, that likelihood is so much higher. There is no more criminality or drug use amongst the Black population or Latino population than the white population. And in fact, there's some drug use, white population is higher. Mm-hmm. And yet who's in the prisons? So that we have got to tie it together. And it is the it is the fundamental way that we begin to dismantle the racist structures that are so dominant in our society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So last week we had a conversation with San Francisco's District Attorney, Chesaboudin, who's been able to reduce the prison population in San Francisco by, I believe, 40% or more since March, since the shelter in place.
Wow.
I mean, he did this in a number of different ways, but he's shown that it is very much possible, and it doesn't take that much time, and it's, you know, it's very accessible, and the crime rate has not increased, because often you hear, oh, we can't let these people out, the crime rate's going to go skyrocket. You know, we have all these criminals roaming around. I would love to see how we can implement similar strategies statewide. You know, I mean, if we could reduce our prison population in California by 40%, that would be incredible. You know, I've heard statistics that, you know, something like roughly 50% of the people currently incarcerated are low-level criminals, non-violent criminals, not a threat to their community. So I'm not familiar with the other bills that you had mentioned, but are there things in the works at the state level to help keep pushing our prison population down? Or do you feel like it's at a standstill at this point?
Not at a standstill. I mean, so I think there's a lot of us, I think we got to thank Governor Newsom for the releases that he has done, because that's why we're now below 100,000. There are many of us who we would like to see everyone who is medically vulnerable and over a certain age released, because again, when you look at the age statistics, the recidivism rate, the criminality rate, I mean, everything is, it's just almost non-existent after a certain age. But culturally, there's this attachment to, well, you know, the nonviolent, we can't let the heinous criminals out. But interestingly enough, those who are serving life sentences, again, the data shows after you've been in prison for a certain number of years and you're a certain age, your criminality and your recidivism is so low. They're not a threat to our community. Now, how we can help the public understand that and the public embrace that is hard, but I think the governor has been courageous in what he's done so far. I think we can push more, but I think we also need to work on helping our communities, just people understand that that is true, that many of these people are not a threat to us. And I know Root and Rebound does that. So many different groups do that. Yep. But the other thing I want to say is that the Senate and the Assembly both on Monday, so it's today, Tuesday, that was yesterday, they approved the trailer bill, which is a budget bill for public safety. And it included, it's part of the 2021 budget. So it means it's in effect right now, goes into effect right now, because the budget went into effect on July 1. Everything in that trailer bill goes into effect immediately, compared to other bills we pass, which won't go into effect, say, till January or later. Okay. That trailer bill included a cap on parole, on the number of years you would have to serve on parole. And I think Whitney can talk with great authority on how many people are sitting in our prisons for stupid reasons. Maybe they had an original underlying crime that maybe, fine, you got a sentence. Yep. But then they keep going back to prison for a parole violation. Right. And that parole violation, there are so many absurd rules on you under parole, alcohol restrictions, pot, cannabis restrictions, all these things, where you could be, again, in the car with someone else who's using cannabis. You might not even be using cannabis, but that's considered a parole violation and you're sent back to prison. That's what a parole violation does, back to prison. So the amount of time on parole does not demonstrate whether a person is going to recidivate or not, meaning, are they going to be criminals again? Are they going to commit a crime again? So the longer the parole, the more likely you're going to violate because of these absurd rules that you have to follow. Like many parole rules are, you can only stay within a single county. Well, you look at the Bay Area. Maybe I live in Contra Costa County, but my job's in Alameda County, or my job's in San Francisco County.
Yeah.
If my parole officer doesn't give me the permission, if I leave my county, parole violation. So there's just really ridiculous rules.
Yeah.
And that bill is, and this was the governor did it. He said, I want a limit on how much time, no matter what your crime was, I want a limit on how much time you're on parole. So that passed. Now, the governor was willing to go further. The assembly would not pass it with sex crimes and such, so we had to amend it, but at least it affects most. And then the other thing that it includes is we've now eliminated, we've banned the box on all college applications in California. When you apply from college from now on, you do not have to check any box about whether you were ever convicted. We also, and that was in that trailer bill. And there were a couple of other really good things. So those are all things that will help decarcerate. And so there is still willingness to work on decarceration. I have another bill right now that has been successful in committee to date and was successful on the Senate floor. So hopefully I'll get it across the finish line. And that stops the practice. Right now, if you're in prison, you don't have the same right as in criminal court as to who can, I'll put it a different way. In criminal court, if they're going to use evidence against me or a witness against me, that witness's evidence has to be corroborated. So if I'm sitting in jail and my jailmate says, oh, I heard him confess, and then it goes, they try to use it in court, it has to be proven, it has to be corroborated.
Right.
You're sitting in prison, that's not the case. Another person in that prison can tell a guard, oh yeah, so-and-so did X. Now, of course, it might be if I'm sitting in prison, it might be in my interest to tell a guard that because maybe I get a little more time in the yard. Maybe I get a phone call, right? Any number of things. But it goes into the incarcerated individual's file without any corroboration, without even my knowledge, if I'm the incarcerated individual that I've been accused of this. I go before the parole board and the parole board goes, oh, I see these 3 incidents that are in your file that you did. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't do those things. And then they're like, oh, you're denying it. Well, you never even heard about it. It's not corroborated. And then you're denied parole. And that's wrong. That is not due process. So my bill would eliminate that practice. And of course, DAs oppose it.
Of course.
But so far, we've been successful. We've been successful so far.
That's great. That's great. I think we used to
Another
call
method of decarceration.
are they using any legal? I think it's corpus delicti. Is that the term that are they using?
Again, I'm not the lawyer, so
Okay.
I just say stop. I don't say this right in committee, but it's no prison snitches.
Right. Okay.
If you're gonna be a snitch, you got to be corroborated.
All right. There you go.
There you go.
That's great.
There you go. So we did have a couple of questions here in our Q&A box. One of them I believe we kind of addressed was around, so Jeff asked, the San Jose police chief admitted that they have a 7-year backlog in fulfilling the San Jose police chief, in fulfilling information requests.
Right. I just read it. So in other words, they're saying, oh, we can't get these records out. So my new bill, SB 776, puts a time limit on it, and then a fine if they don't release the records within a certain time period, within that time frame. So they can't get away with that, even, not even months.
Okay. Well, great. And then maybe we can tie the second question in, the for-profit prison. So my understanding was California did pass something related to for-profit prisons, but it has not been fully implemented. Is that the case?
No, right now, so first off, I read the question, the fact that we have long parole terms and parole violations is not related to the for-profit prisons, because we've had those ridiculous parole terms and parole violation for years. And it was only in the last, say, 10 or 15 years or so that the private prisons were even used. And right now, there was, California had already started to end its contracts with private prisons. We never had contracts with very many. That's one thing where we operate our own. So that's kind of been a myth. We've never had very many, but we still had, I think, 2 remaining, and we've now terminated those. So, so we now no longer have any contracts with private prisons in California.
Great. I did want to also briefly touch on immigrant detention as well, since I feel it is very much related. You know, I think we have over 6,000 migrants who are currently being detained, and similar to the prisons, we're having outbreaks, and these folks are in, you know, terrible unsanitary conditions. I know that there's been a lot going on at the governor's mansion. There's a campaign for Free Them All. Do you have any thoughts on all of this in relation to incarceration and detention?
Well, we know, unfortunately, that a number of the facilities that the feds use to hold our immigrants are county jail facilities that our counties and our county sheriffs have accepted contracts from the feds. We have tried to put some more oversight into that. I mean, we technically cannot dictate to the feds how they handle, you know, what they do, and that's their jurisdiction. But because these are our county jails, if it is a facility that is run by our sheriffs, we do have the right to inspect it, to investigate. And we had some very bad situations a couple years back in Yolo County. And there was a great reluctance on the part of the Attorney General to go in and intervene. So we strengthened the law around the role of the Attorney General in terms of making sure that any federal inmates that were held in state or county property would have to follow much of the same type of regulations and conditions that we require. So we did do that, and that's helped. But we don't have a lot of other say on the federal hold on the immigration and the immigrants.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you want to bring Sonja in?
Yeah.
Is she there, Sonja?
Sonja, do you want to rejoin our conversation? You can
Hi.
turn if you like.
Give her-
I've been listening.
Hi.
Hi.
I know we're coming down towards the end here, but I know there's a number of different areas we could go into. And I know you have other bills related to housing. Housing's another huge issue that, you know, we're dealing with now, and it's going to be getting worse if the federal stimulus is ending. And also the environment. I know that, Senator, you have some important stuff going with the environment as well, and you've done some good work around those. But Sonja, I don't know if you wanted to chime in or follow up on anything we've been discussing, or had any questions for the senator?
Yeah, I just want to express my gratitude to Senator Skinner as a constituent, and also as someone who's a grassroots advocate who works to ensure that our elected officials really understand how the community experiences these issues. I just really appreciate Senator Skinner for being someone who gets to know the details and the substance and the people behind these laws and bills. You know, in working this past year on the Ban the Box to Higher Education bill, along with Senator Skinner's office, you know, a lot of our coalition is people who are formerly incarcerated leaders themselves, who have been students in higher education, who have overcome all the odds and barriers and are now in leadership positions where it's essential to put that hand backwards, realizing so many students are still facing these barriers. California is only the 5th state in the country to pass a ban the box in higher education. So this is still very cutting edge.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's
which is
cool.
pretty shocking.
Cool. Well, it
shocking.
just passed yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah. So it's really exciting. And I think where California goes, we know much of the nation goes. We were one of the originators of ban the box in employment. We had a really important fair chance occupational licensure law. So California, I think, is seen as a leader for much of the country in rolling back a lot of the discrimination against people who have been systems impacted, who have been formerly incarcerated. And Senator Skinner spoke to these issues beautifully, but we know much of what makes someone, quote, a criminal has nothing to do with criminal behavior. You know, wealthy communities, white people commit crimes at basically the same rates as low income people of color and Black folks. But we know
more drugs.
Our prisons don't reflect that. They don't reflect the way that people actually commit crimes. And a lot of things that we consider crimes today weren't considered crimes 50 years ago. You know, felony murder rule is one of those examples where I think people are so shocked, but there's so many ways in which we turn people into criminals by saying, you know, not turning in your homework when you're a kid on probation is criminal, like the young woman in the Midwest, the young Black girl who's been in the news recently, Grace, where we say being homeless is criminal, where, you know, using a restroom, you know, going to the bathroom in public is criminal. So there's so many ways in which crime, to me, is actually a socially made up thing in a lot of ways. And if we actually cared about keeping our community safe, we would look at like what heals people, what keeps people safe, and, you know, why is anyone hungry? Why is anyone having to use the bathroom outside in the first place? Those are questions that are so much more important to me than, you know, who should we carve out of this new criminal justice reform bill? Like, we should be looking at the roots of why are people not well to begin with, and what are the structures and systems that lead us to that. So I appreciate, you know, Senator Skinner, that you really highlight those issues around inequity and racial justice as part of your work across housing, across the environment, across criminal justice. And I think with the higher education bill, you know, one of the reasons that we were so passionate working on that alongside impacted students is that if you think about it, for the individuals who have surmounted the most obstacles in life to get to that level where they're even applying for college and have never had that door open for them. It's never just been like, you know, from middle school, here's how you apply to college, like I experienced, where my whole path was set up to make me succeed, to go to college, to go to law school, to be able to take on higher education. So we have individuals who are so much more brilliant than I could ever be in my wildest imagination, who are having the door slammed on them. And to me, that is unfathomable and immoral. And I am so grateful that these doors are finally opening through law and policy, because it's those individuals in leadership positions who can see the problems and then put their hand backwards to make sure that we have more people who are formerly incarcerated, who are leaders, who are in politics, who are really paving the way for the future of policy. So I think our work is just owed in great debt and gratitude to Senator Skinner, the many people who have led the pathway for an amazing woman like her to be in politics, and to all the people who are impacted by mass incarceration, who really design what the future could look like, and ends up benefiting all of us. It truly, truly does, to have that inclusion and to have that community at the helm. So I'm really lucky and grateful to all the people I work with.
So Sonja, on Ban the Box, I think it's worth it pointing out that it's not that you were prohibited from going to college if you were formally convicted or had a felony record. There was no prohibition on your attending a college.
Right.
Maybe some programs, but what we found though is that the applicant, so I'm a formerly incarcerated person, for example, and just as Sonja said, I've overcome all these obstacles, and then I look at this, it's already hard for me to even believe that I'm going to be taken seriously or considered by a higher education institute. And then I look at that application, and there, right in my face again, is this question: have I been convicted? And so immediately in my mind, if I could kick that box, then that means they've already said no to me. And so what we found is that many, many people that otherwise would have applied to college were inhibited. They felt they wouldn't even apply just because that question was on the application. So that's why it's so important to eliminate it. And that's why I felt really good we did.
Well, go ahead, Whitney. Did you want to?
I have a question. I know I waited till the last minute, but it's might be a little granular. But is there any activity in the area of juries and sentencing? Because just one of the things you pointed out is how people don't appreciate how draconian the sentences are, and one of the rules that always perturbed me and a lot of people I work with was the fact that the juries would have no idea that they were finding someone guilty for something that they thought was minor, and the person would go away for many years, if not their life. And is that something that there's any activity around?
Well, Whitney, that's a really good point, because the part of the jury instructions are you can't tell the jury what, based on verdict X or Y, what that means in terms of the length of sentence. And a lot of people don't realize that, for example, 3 strikes, which still exists in California, it's not been eliminated, or sentence enhancements, what we call sentence enhancements, both of those can add many, many years to a sentence of something that otherwise is considered a pretty low-level crime. I need to talk to my public safety staff about what we might do in that area, but I'm glad you brought this up just to point this out. Another thing that Governor Newsom has done is he has created a penal code review commission, and it's headed by Michael Romano. Michael Romano is a Stanford professor and lawyer who runs the 3 Strikes Project. So Michael Romano's day job is representing 3 strikers and bringing them back to court to get their sentences overturned. And he has a great history on that. But he's now the chair of this review commission. Senator John Burton, former Senator John Burton, is on it. A number of former judges are on it. And then Assembly Member Sidney Comp-Lager Dove and myself. We're the 2 legislators. And we are going through a granular review of all of California's laws and looking at, we've had all these panels, formerly incarcerated people, DAs, public defenders, researchers, others present to us. We've had 3 meetings so far, and they are 2 days, full day long. We're having another one in August, and they're open to the public. So they're virtual now, but you can watch the panels, you can see the questions, and at the end of it, and we'll make our recommendations sometime in December or January for changes to California's penal code because I think I can't say everything that inspired Governor Newsom, but Governor Brown used to hold it up, and you don't see on both my hands. But he said, when he first became governor, it was like this thick, and now it's like, it's 4 times the size. And he's like, do we need all these laws? And look at all these sentence enhancements. And there's no correlation to a drop in crime. We've had a drop in crime, just for years now. So this could be a great thing, depending on, what we come out with and the governor's receptivity to it, and then what the legislature is willing to change in statute.
And again, what's the name of the committee?
Called that. I'm going to pull it up in my emails right now so I can give you the proper name.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. All right, good. I got it right. It's called Committee on the Revision of the Penal Code.
Okay. Thank you.
And our next meeting, you can go online. If you just look that up, you can find all of our minutes. We had a meeting in April, a meeting in June. We had a meeting in July, and our next meeting, let's see. I don't know the exact date, but it's in August. But they're very, very fascinating, very interesting.
That is extremely interesting. That's wonderful. Thanks very much.
Wow.
Thank you for asking the question that prompted me.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, Well, I know, Senator, you're very busy and probably need to go spend some time with your family and have some dinner. Is there any last comments or things, Whitney, Sonja, anyone would like to share?
Well, Nick, you asked me about, I was going to say another bill that was significant that I said had relevance to the subject and yet not, but that was my bill on student athletes.
Yes.
And that bill, yeah, that bill gave, now it sounds funny, you're like, what's the relationship? It gave student athletes the right to their name, image, and likeness. And the reason I say it's like it, because you think exploitation. We allowed for the NC2A to exploit athletes. And of course, who did it most harm? Black athletes. So that at the peak of your athletic career, when you have the most market value, you are denied
Any money.
1 penny of compensation for that value. And of course, you know, part of the generational impact of incarceration is not only are you not earning anything. In fact, we have prison labor, very, very analogous to slave labor. So you're not, you're maybe earning what, 16 cents or something if you're doing work. Your family is denied your whatever economic, that productivity that you would otherwise have if you're not incarcerated. And then when you're out of jail or out of prison, it's very hard to get a job. So I always see these exploitation issues as really having overlap, but I was really, really proud to be able to carry that bill and to basically say, no, student athletes have rights. And now 22 other states have basically mimicked California's law, and the NCAA is going to change their
We were the first ones, and thanks to you, we were able to push that forward. That was really incredible. I was so surprised to see that happen.
I was too.
That's another thing, you know, I
Yeah.
think you're performing miracles there. You know, you're getting police records open and getting college athletes paid. So we really appreciate all you're doing there. I know it's not easy work, and you're really hustling. So thank you for doing all you're doing for your district and for our whole state. You know.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you all.
This has been a really inspiring conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Sonja. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone who joined.
All right. No, yeah, find out more about the senator at her website. She's got a number of great bills she's championing this year. And you can find out about us at californiaprogressivealliance.org. And we will have a recording available for those that are interested. And thank you, audience, and everyone for joining us. And Sonja and Whitney for joining me. Appreciate all of your participation, and everyone have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, guys.